and CBF asked me to help figure out how do we operationalize this money in a way that helps churches figure out what thriving means. And so we have at the very least, from a scientific method perspective, a hypothesis or a thesis that we're working on. And then the third thing is I hope I give you at least one exercise tool that you can use to maybe help frame what the big picture is for where you're at, how you're thinking. So those are 3 goals. We have an hour. I think we'll get there. I also will say I have a ton of material that we won't get through. And so depending on how our time goes and how the room feels, we'll either keep clicking through slides or we'll just quit. We'll move on. So, sound good? About me, I'm Chris. This is my family. My wife, Natalie, works in Baptist adjacent life. She currently works at Wake Forest University in the Divinity School. She runs 2 Lilly grants and a Baptist initiative. And at the end of the day says, well, I worked on 4 things and you only worked on 1. How did that go for you? My older son, Cam, is 14. He is in middle school, 8th grade, and my younger son, Finn, is 6. And I wanted to show you the other picture from before this one, but my wife didn't. My wife looked bad too. It wasn't just my 6-year-old going like this. So we have a dog named Copper. He's 7 months old, and my middle son loves him. And then I graduated with my thesis from Duke Divinity School last May. And that's where a lot of this like thinking and work kind of emanates from. On the next slide, I've highlighted 2 important places for me. The first, there on the left is Oxford Baptist Church. It's where I served for 8 years as pastor. It's the church where I got, in 2016, I sort of got this feeling that like, okay, things aren't working right, and we need to figure out something new needs to happen. We got this email one night in February, from a woman who's about my age. She's a volunteer choir director. And the email was, your kids have to be at practice on Wednesday night because we are performing in church on Sunday. And it was written sort of that directly, as if the job of children's choir was not formation, it was performance. And I ended up using it in my application essay to get into Duke Divinity School. They liked it, so I keep telling that story. In the midst of my Duke Divinity School time, I discovered a process called design thinking, which emanates kind of the soul right now of design thinking is in Silicon Valley. And it's also, it's just in the web. Okay. And these are like 4 pictures from the what's called the D School at Stanford University. And if any of you watch the show Silicon Valley on HBO, it's a hilarious skewer of all of the innovation, all of the like jargon and the whatever. We want to cut through the jargon, but the D School is an amazing place. There's some references in that first episode of Silicon Valley that are kind of making fun of the D School, but I love what they do. I don't take it too seriously, but I think it can help us in the church. So our next slide reminds us of what I'm trying to remember. Oh, okay. So as I think about the state of the church today, there's a driving quote that is really helpful to me, and we'll get to in a second, or we'll get through here in this moment, which is, we don't rise to the level of our goals, but we fall to the level of our systems. It's from a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And the idea behind that is that I can have the goal of being an Olympic athlete. At 45, it's probably curling is like my last thing I can do. I got a shot at, but having the goal is not enough. What I need is a system that helps me get to that goal. Churches have a lot of dreams and goals and ideas. And you ever hear at church the phrase, if we could just, Like if I ask you, somebody want to complete the sentence for your church, if we could just
Get $1 million.
get $1 million, right? Make mortgage payments, if we could just.
Get young families.
If we could just get a few young families in here. If we could just is one of those phrases that I think points towards a goal and a dream, but there's nothing operationalized or systematized or structured beneath if we could just. So we need, we'll move to the next slide, which is we need systems. Goals are about the results we want to achieve. Systems are about the processes that lead to those goals. So as we talk about less plans, more practice, we're talking about how do we do the things we want to do in order to get to the places we want to get to. And this, I think, in my estimation, is a shift from where we were. Let's go to the next slide, because I made up this really cool slide that I like, called "The Church as a Spiritual Factory." In that picture of Oxford Baptist that I showed you, you could, it wasn't handicap accessible because like we were grandfathered in, so we didn't have to deal with that, which made it really hard to push strollers. This is me pushing the stroller up the stairs into the nursery. So like you can't get a stroller into the nursery without stairs. But if you could, the first door on the left was where the bed babies go. And then the next one was where you go after that. And then you moved across the hall after that, and then here, and then you went upstairs to the children's department, and then you went out the back door of the children's department and ran all the way across to the youth building, came down through the children, or through the music suite, where you did a lot of your formation stuff. All of the adult education stuff was on the bottom, and then you rolled yourself into the sanctuary, and you rolled yourself out of the sanctuary as a casket, in a casket. It was literally a straight path you could trace from the nursery to the back stairs where we put the caskets out. And it's easy. I don't want you to hear, to the extent that the church was a factory is not a critique. To the extent that the church still tries to be a factory might be a critique. You see, the thing about the factory is that it was how life in a lot of our towns and cities and communities was organized. So the guy who ran accounting at work every week, which committee did that person serve on when he came to church? And the HR person went on. That's right. And the manager, the executive vice president, became the deacon chair. And the teachers from the school taught Sunday school. And you had society stratified in such a way that everybody knew their role, they knew their place, they knew their goal, and it all just transferred over into church life. And it was great while it worked. And it worked for a long time. We can scroll through a couple of quick slides here. The 40s, the 1900s, the 1950s, 1980s, the world I grew up in. I was in 3rd grade when the Challenger exploded. I remember John Lennon being alive and then being shot. I remember the USSR being a thing that we were scared of. And then the 90s were amazing. And then what happens is this next slide that I drew. NAFTA. In North Carolina, we call it NAFTA because all the textile factories left. There was also the tobacco buyout. But what was happening was actually deeper than that and deeper than my little drawing here. We go to the next slide. In a book called Reinventing the Organization, what the pandemic has highlighted for us at the very least is 6 major shifts that are happening in society that were different. We could argue whether they're better or worse, but they're different. Is the biggest point they're different. The social conditions that we live in now are different. In the year 2000, 1999, 98, 99, I was a student at Baylor University and Silicon Bears. And Julie Pennington Russell, who pastors First Baptist DC, was called to Calvary. And I remember thinking, is it okay for a woman to be a pastor? It was 20 years ago. I was a little behind her, caught up. Social conditions have changed. Technology has changed. We think it's changed really fast. I think that if I look at my 97-year-old grandmother who died in like 19, she was born, anyway, anybody born in like the wake of World War I went from not having phones to living in a world where we had cell phones and the major technological shifts that existed in their lives. They didn't have cars, and now Teslas drive themselves most of the time. The economic conditions have changed dramatically, what we're living in. And they're changing right now. I mean, inflation is like in every paragraph you see or you read. We're talking, like Alan and I hung out for an hour yesterday. We talked about inflation. Ricky and I in the car this morning talked about inflation. Wait, no one talked about inflation if you weren't paying for stuff in the 70s. Unless you were paying for stuff. We're concerned about the environment. The nature of our politics has changed dramatically. Better, worse, whatever, I don't care who you vote for, the way that politics operates right now is very different. And then finally, demographic shifts are happening in ways that they weren't before. We're talking about immigration in ways we hadn't before. We're talking about refugees. I didn't know what a refugee was. Tom Petty sang, "You don't have to live like a refugee," and we rocked out to it, but we didn't know what it was talking about. All that has changed around us. But our nominating committee report at church has not. Right? Are you still working off the same Excel spreadsheet that somebody made on Windows NT? Because Oxford Baptist Church is, they upgrade the version. And what has happened, if we go to this next slide, is that we had a world, when the world operates like a factory, it's like a Mad Lib. You remember Mad Libs? I don't know what this one actually says. But basically, you fill in the blank of things. The product will also solve a trendy world problem, while at the same time helping an endangered species. This was the world we had, and I think this is the world we're inheriting and living in, and need to figure out how to kind of deal with it. And so what helps us here is knowing a lot of information. I think what helps us here is knowing how to do stuff. So we need embodied practices, not just renewed structures. The renewed structure operated on this sort of model that if we grease the wheels of the machinery, everything could operate a little bit more efficiently, and that would create some gains that we needed. Renewed practices are thinking differently. So CBS Thriving Congregations Initiative is 2 slides forward now. That's okay. If I will, this is sort of a commercial for our initiative, but it is the practices that I think we need to get to, and then after this, we're going to get to like some actual like hands-on practice. The CBF Thriving Congregations Initiative will, I guess I said will, but it at least seeks to deepen congregational capacity to build and design the future by cultivating these 5 traits, which are on the next slide. I'm kind of proud of these 2. I didn't need like a design firm or anything to do this. Go back 1. These are the 5 traits laid out. We think what churches need is a compelling clarity of mission and vision and values. A couple of the churches that I've talked to that have actually had, it's anecdotal, but I'm name the churches that have had good experiences during the pandemic have said, we just figured out what our mission and our vision was. We figured out what was most important to us, and everything we did out of that. So they would say something like, we knew we couldn't gather around the tables on Wednesday night for supper, but we knew fellowship was important. So we decided to ... They made programming decisions out of their values. And the churches that have had good experiences during the pandemic, or I would venture to say, anytime your church has had a good experience, even living in the 2 years of the pandemic, it was because you figured out a new way to live out the clarity and the values that you had. The second one is holy tenacity. I'm going to rely on my slide for the definition of that, except that we know what tenacity is. And a lot of times we don't think about tenacity in church work, but we do think about it in faith. I press on towards the goal. Faithful agility. This might be one where the factory did not need us to be agile. A lot of people know the name Wilshire Baptist Church because it's one of the kind of signature CBF churches. It's in Dallas, it's a nice part of Dallas. And I was there one week when they were teaching their ministerial residents about, okay, so this is how we do communion. And the associate pastor who was saying, okay, so we sit here and we do this and we do that. And he introduced the conversation to say, this is how we do communion. And this is not a place where we're looking for innovation. This is how we do what we do. And so, which I can appreciate from the extent of practically speaking, we've got a sanctuary that seats 1,000 people. This is how we get it done in 7.5 minutes. He wasn't saying that we weren't ever going to reimagine how God was feeding us through this. He was saying, practically speaking, this is how we're going to get it done. If we were having communion in this room right now, it would take agility to imagine how is God at work through the bread and the cup here now. And actually, Wilshire, I haven't been to Wilshire since the pandemic, but they have certainly used agility to rethink what does it mean for. I used to hate the little prepared things, but now that's all we use, right? Whoever was the engineer that created that thing. Rooted relationships. One of the ways I think about this is in a congregation needs deep relationships within itself and across the generations. And then dynamic collaboration, which I'll say a little bit more, but collaboration is how do we relate to other entities. So some definitions of these, let's go to the next one. Compelling clarity is knowing who you are, what your giftedness is, what the importance of your ministry is, and being clearly defined by what you are rather than what you are not. I can guarantee you that Paul Baxley wrote this sentence. And as CBF is looking at a 30th anniversary this year, it's how do we define what CBF is rather than CBF is just not, we're just the ones who aren't Southern Baptists anymore. How do our congregations know? What is the practice that helps us to know who we are and how our ministry makes a difference in the community? The second one, holy tenacity, is a persistence that flows from a growing faith. It's not surrendering in the face of challenges and not merely enduring difficult seasons. Some of us did tenacity better in the last few years than others. Thriving comes from remembering the seed growing in the good soil from the parable of the sower. I hadn't talked about the Bible yet. Should have. Parable of the sower. I'm getting it. I'll get it. The third trait, as talked about already, faithful agility, being flexible and innovative in the face of challenges. Can anybody quote for me Acts chapter 6? Anybody know what the story is in Acts chapter 6? Deacons, you read it once a year on Deacon Ordination Sunday, right? Okay, so the way that that story goes, you had the Jewish widows and you had the Greek widows, and they weren't getting the same amount of food. So they complained that we need an equitable way to divide up the food. And so, what are we going to do? And they said, well, let's get some deacons, pick out some folks who would be good at serving. And everyone said, that's a great idea. Let's do it. And in seven verses, the early church reimagined leadership and service in the church. Now, this is either a miracle or they left some parts of the story out. Given that I am not a miracle worker in my church, never have been, I choose to read that story as if there are some stuff they left out and they just cut to the chase of that story. It takes agility to get to the point where we're comfortable with a new idea. But when a new idea and a new practice or a new way of embodying what it is we're called to embody comes, we see God and sense God at work. Agility helps us see God at work when the things around us are changing. The last two, rooted relationships, is having a life and faith marked by deep, meaningful relationships. Relationships help us hear and clarify God's call. And relationships, I think, in church need to be, like I said, cross-generational whenever possible. And relationships are ways in which we as God's people, like John 15, abide in me and you will bear much fruit. I'm the vine, you are the branches. Rooted relationships tie us to abiding in the Lord. And the final statement is dynamic collaboration. This is a word that if you've listened or read CBF stuff you've heard in the last couple of years. It's carrying out work and ministry in ways that bring forth the life-giving koinonia that Paul speaks about in Philippians. It extends from leadership to partnerships, locally and globally. It means being connected to and rooted in the kingdom of God beyond one local church to see places for partnership and support. When church was a factory, we thought every church needed to be a one-stop shop for everything. So we had a Sunday school, worship, and then we had Sunday night, and we had Baptist Training Union, and then we came back on one night and we did Actings and Royal Ambassadors and GAs and RAs, and then we did all of the things. Now in, say, Oxford, but also in Springfield and in Falls Church and in Herndon and DC, there are nonprofits doing social care for people that is better than our church can do it. When the ability to help someone depends on how am I feeling and how much is in the benevolence account on that day when a person comes to ask for help. Did someone come when the preacher came and was having a weak moment and they got a room at the hotel, but someone else did? There's no equity in that. But area congregations in ministry has the capacity to take leftover food from the Walmart distribution center and then distribute food to people in the community who need it. So my weakness is not being able to help people with food, but their strength becomes a point of collaboration. When we see what we're not good at, where we need help, it allows us to collaborate with someone who has that strength. So we do our SWOT analysis and we say, okay, these are the places, the weaknesses and threats are the places where we need to find partners that can help us do things we're called to better. Across the next 6-7 years, we want every church to be in CBF Life, and any that are not in CBF Life but care here and want to ask, to be able to name these things and to identify these practices in their life so that they can grow. And we think that that is what will lead to thriving. The way that by way of commercial, the way that happens in 2022 most visibly is going to be we're going to have 4 to 5 churches, maybe 6 that are North Carolina based, because that's where my home is right now, and that's where our relationships started. That are going to enter a year-long cohort that will start at General Assembly, bring 4 to 6 leaders from each of those churches together. We'll have 2 days of kind of intense meetings to talk about these things, to teach around them, to give them chances to identify these things in their church, identify areas where they need to go to work. And then each month we'll meet with them through magics of owls and Zooms and all those things, in order to help them begin to assess where they can experiment, where can they try some new things, where can they have opportunities to grow, and then reflect. There's three retreats for leadership, and then monthly meetings with these folks. And then we're going to see where it goes. And we're going to try next year with 20 churches. And we're going to try the third year with probably 25. And the first 2 years, we're sort of like, we're building from relationships. The third year, we're going to do an application process. And we want to put you in partnership with churches. We want to put churches in partnership with churches where you can learn and grow, which means there will be a cohort that's regionally based. Maybe like you look at a place like, I mean, we could do one in the DC metro area because there are enough churches, but you guys are far enough from each other that you're not really competing with them, right? Or maybe you're at a church like First Baptist Auburn, Alabama, that's right next to a college campus. And so what you want to do is learn with First Baptist Athens, Georgia, and other college town churches that have college town problems. Or maybe you're First Baptist Raleigh or First Baptist DC, and you want to deal with First Baptist church problems. Or maybe you're none of those things and you're in a small town and you want to deal with small town. Like, how do we help you get with the churches you need to be with, so that the relationships that used to happen in a local association now can happen in a more connected way? Okay, I've talked for 30 minutes. And you haven't talked yet. So I want to give you a chance to ask some questions if you have any up to this point. And if not, we can keep going. Paul, you pulled your
question. One of my issues in our churches, you hit one thing, that's the way we do things. To do any of the 5, you need a mindset that you need to change. And, I kind of thought we're an older church, and people kind of moved on. I thought, now will be the time to act opposite and said something to the kid. But some of the younger people pick up and say, we're a traditional Baptist church, and all those other people are doing these other things, and this is the way we do it. I don't know how you can buy that, so they don't seem to be able to.
There's a real interesting, the dean of Duke Divinity School has a dichotomy. The former dean of Duke Divinity School, now the president of Belmont, Greg Jones, he's gone to basketball school from Duke. That's a joke for basketball fans. You get it. Okay, all right, great. I got it. Sorry. Alan's the only one who gets all my sports jokes. There's tradition and there's traditionalism. And Greg says this, but he didn't make it up, right? Patrick's nodding with me. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. Tradition is the living faith of the dead. Our challenge in our churches, because so many of our folks, all we have is this factory mindset that's so structured, is going to be, how do we realize which things we're doing are traditions and which things are we doing are traditionalism? Why are we still cutting the end off the roast when we got a bigger pan and a bigger? It takes time to uncover those things, and it takes relationships and conversations, and it takes it takes investment. And one of the fears that I think is worth naming is, do we have the people who are willing to invest in helping bring that? And do we have the people who are do we have folks on the other side who are open enough to figure out, okay, I'm willing to try something. The grant is written in such a way as to say, let's walk into Westwood Baptist Church and reimagine this everywhere. Practically speaking, what's going to happen is we're going to take a small leadership group within a church like Westwood or any of your churches and say, where's an area where we can get clarity, where we can like try these practices out, where we can run an experiment that doesn't get you guys, that somehow leads churches to start firing volunteers. And then from what we learn, how can we across, yes, the first year, but also bake it into our culture, this idea like that Thrive is going to take these practices. And so maybe we work in youth ministry here, but what do we learn from youth ministry that can help us in music? And what do we learn then as it applied to music that can help us with our leadership structure? Patrick, you had your mask off for a second ago. Were you drinking coffee or do you want to say something?
I was just having a drink, but I will share.
Yeah.
No offense to Alan, I think this is one of these where I want to kind of brag on my church a little bit because an elder came to me years ago as we were seeking the senior pastor's position and said, be sure that you hire the right person because dying churches hire dying ministers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I want to brag on my church because I feel like at least somewhere in the core group, there are those who are willing to do exactly what you're talking about, to invest, to try. And so leveraging that is where I sense a focus that we need to concentrate.
Yeah.
I think the practices you're talking about are probably very vital.
I think the hard part, so much of what you said, Chris, is about humility.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, we all hear that laugh, right? I mean, to step back as a church and say, there's an organization down the street that can do this better than us, how can we support them?
Yeah.
It's about humility, right?
Yeah.
To step back and say, there might be a new way of doing this, that's about humility. And we live in a culture, I'm not even talking about church, just we live in a culture that does not value humility. We live in a culture that values what's on your resume, where's the results that you've produced in the past, and how does that leverage something that you can do going forward? We live in a culture that values having done it before as proof of success. And so that makes the whole tradition or traditionalism conversation really difficult to have in places.
Yeah. I said to the guys on the way in this morning, Ricky and Jay walked in together, and I said, well, I'm not sure if I have anything to say, but I know what I want to say. So, I'm not sure if I'm saying anything, but I know what I want to say. Which is to say, right now, I believe in this. I also want to fully acknowledge this is like a 35,000 foot view. Like this is us. Oh, there is a plane up there. I wish we could fly like that plane. But humility is not like I've been to this church today, but I've also served a church where this happened. I suspect there is a kitchen right back there, and I have served churches where that's where we would put the welcome center. Okay, but like if you're new to Westwood, you don't know how to get to the welcome center over here in the corner of the fellowship hall near the kitchen. But because Miss Jane doesn't want to walk real far or likes to keep her pots in this spot, Miss Jane's humble, but she does not see in the bigger picture that if you want to create a welcoming, hospitable space, it's going to take changing. University Baptist Church. I was in Baton Rouge earlier this month for University Baptist Church. Andy Hale's the pastor. It's a good CBF church, solid history. they have a donut and coffee half hour between Sunday school and worship. So I got there about 10:30. And Andy is younger than me. Andy's in his late 30s. And Andy's just he's got the personality, like I bow to tradition and traditionalism in a way that Andy doesn't, and I admire that in him. And they repurposed what was like a bridal suite right off the back of their sanctuary. So this is where the coffee needs to go. We'll figure out what to do with the brides later. And by the way, the brides are getting married at venues now. Yet I was at another church not that long ago that had an endowment. So the facilities were immaculate in Virginia, the foothills of Virginia. Like, I walked this was like, this is amazing. Like those of you in a mid-century modern, like their sanctuary could be featured in a mid-century modern magazine. It was amazing, like awesome. But you walk in, you look at the parlor, and it's the hall of past pastors in oil painting. And I don't know if that's what they need in that space or not. I'm not church. But I can probably at some point say that there'll be someone who will die on the hill of traditionalism, and that's where we keep our old pastors, rather than saying what the young people need is a nursery off the back of the sanctuary, so that if the 4-year-olds are not doing it in worship, we can just take them there to play and we can pipe the service. I don't know if that's what they need to do or not, but I know that it would be hard to do. None of this is easy, but probably all of it is, some version of it is going to be necessary. Any other statements or questions at the moment? Yeah.
I just want to comment that your comment about it takes time is true.
Yeah.
I kind of inherited one of those traditionalist churches, and Alan and I were in a cohort through another group, and we did some of that. They called it remissioning, and it sort of forced me to do some exercises and have some conversations with the people about the top things that they remember from their past, and then, sort of what an interim minister would do. But I have to just say that it was painful the first few years. Then COVID, of course, was tough, but COVID allowed me to do some pruning without, and I'm sure you all feel the same, without hurting anything, because it was required by circumstances. And so now we're in this new place of trying to figure out what do we add, how do we collaborate with other churches to do those, what are our strengths. But I just want to say, the whole point, it takes time. I mean, only now, 2 years later, I guess, since we took our class, and I started to see engagement. And my folks are mostly over 80, mostly. And they are coming to me, asking me, well, why aren't we doing something for Ukraine? What can we do? All of a sudden, this Holy Spirit shift that I just want to do some, it takes time. So now the big questions are, how do we, with the aging congregation, I can't do that cross-generational stuff yet because the kids all left and, we have to get new people in.
Right.
So I know you don't have to answer that, but I just want to share that it is a process, and I really like your approach about collaboration, rooted relationship, because that's what I had to do. I had to get to know them better.
I served a church that died. It was a 3-year stint. It was Lilly funded. It was a unique partnership with residents and stuff like that. And it was in Mobile, Alabama. We loved being there. The food was great. I couldn't deal with the weather. It was too hot. They wanted to be a thriving church, but they didn't want to do anything different. And it wasn't all of them, but it was just enough. I remember one woman who ended up being the matriarch of the church. I think she was a reluctant matriarch also, which real problem. Who said, I just want to be here. I left First Baptist Mobile to come out on this hill and plant a church in the late 70s. I've given so much of it. I sacrificed so much to leave that place to come here. I just want to be here. I just want to go ahead and die here on this hill. And unfortunately, the church died before she did. And I can respect dying with dignity also. What I always had a hard time with was saying we didn't want to die, but not being willing to do anything. One last anecdote about that church is I feel like, to use another buzzword for the last 2 years, I feel like they were vaccinated against change. Because when I had Ronnie Brewer, who was leader of CBF Alabama at the time, came in and talked and led a deal. Bill Whistle, who runs, at the time was running Center for Congregational Health, was in town. He came, gave a workshop to them. When you ask them what's their mission, what's their mission, what's their vision, what's their values, what's their dream, they could answer all of those questions for you. They knew all the right answers. But they knew them just enough that they were like inoculated against change. And so I keep that memory close, because I don't want to use so much jargon across the next 5 years that I inoculate a church against change, because they know how to use the words but not do the things. Okay, so if I could, on a sheet of paper and an exercise, do thriving congregations with you in 10 minutes, I would. And so this is going to be a super quick sprint of an exercise. Everybody take a sheet of paper. And if you, I feel like this is big paper. If you would like, I'll tell you, one thing design thinkers like is Sharpies, and the other is Post-it notes. So if you have a request for a color, you're welcome to it. And if you want to use the pen you have, you're welcome to that too. These are brand new, fresh from the FedEx store in Falls Church. The FedEx store in Falls Church has a book entitled Seducing Strangers. I would not recommend purchasing that book, neither would Jake Easy. It was bizarre. It was a business of.
I think it has to do with like introducing someone to business.
All right. I'm gonna let you, we're gonna do this personally. I want you to think about this. You're gonna be thinking about your person, like you yourself. You do not have to share anything you write down on the sheet of paper. So this is not, but I want you to be honest with yourself about this, and we're gonna do a little exercise. We're gonna do some folding. I'd like you to fold it in half this way. It's a little better this way.
I'm on the new screen, sorry.
Oh, okay, yeah, you're on something different, okay. Now I would like you to take your two folds and do them like this, so you get quarters basically, okay? You want a sheet that's kind of quartered like that. Doesn't have to be perfect, and it's bothering you that mine is not. But go to the next, go through the 5 traits, and there's one that says creative hustle. Keep going forward. Okay, now, if you hold your paper like this to yourself as if you have a book, okay? I'm going to give you 1 minute to write on this right-hand column on your folded sheet, goals. No, left-hand column is goals. Left-hand column, I want you to write goals. Oh yeah, go back one.
Sorry.
Okay, I want you to write goals right here like this. Goals like this. No, close this. Oh yeah, no, you're right, you're right. Goals. Okay, you can think about an area of your life, or you can think about your whole life. What are some goals you have? What are some goals you have? Lose 20 pounds, understand coding, watch the basketball game tonight, whatever that might be. You have a minute and 28 seconds to write down 3 to 5 goals you have in your whatever. And there is no wrong answer, literally no wrong answer. Pretty close to the end. I don't know what it says, but we're close, we're close. 17 seconds. I am going to restart the timer now that it has gone off. And on your next column, I want you to write on the same folded page, I want you to write gifts. The other column across the front, I want you to write your gifts on the other side. And here's what I want you to think about. What are you proud of about yourself? What do you like to do or are good at? Do people compliment you for something? Go ahead and write it down. You got a minute and a half to write down a handful of gifts that you have in your life, who you are, what you're all about. Let's go. 30 seconds. When you're done, you can open your sheet up and put goals and gifts on opposite sides and flip it over. Flip it over so you can see the goals and the gifts on top. I do it backwards from the way that it was started. Because one of the reasonings is that I don't want you to, I feel like you can think about your goals and your gifts separately from these other things. I'm afraid if you muddle them all a little bit, you might not get as, you won't get it, you might be able to not get as interesting answers. So let's go, in the middle, you've got a third, a third, a third. I didn't have it, I've been reusing a lot of paper in my house because I didn't want to go to buy a ream paper. But let's take a minute, and what I want you to talk through, what are the principles in your life that form your beliefs? What are the founding beliefs, the formative beliefs of your personal constitution? What are the things that you hold most dear that get you through difficult situations? What is most important to you? And we'll take a minute and 10 seconds to do that. What are your principles, your values? You know, honesty, hard work, integrity, value high quality experiences, value meaningful relationships. 7 seconds. And then you can draw a line like Sam and Tunde did. They're the ones who came up with this exercise. And write, who are the people in your life that mean something to you, that you can count on, people that you would love to know, people that inspire you? Make a quick list. If Bob Dylan inspires you, put Bob Dylan on the list. If your spouse doesn't inspire you, figure out what you do with that. Who do you learn the most from? How could you spend time with people that you would love to know better? Whose work do you admire?
So we're writing people.
Yeah, people and resources. People. Confess, like, the old Kanye West was one I wrote down one time. Malcolm Gladwell made my list a couple times. I've done this. What's that?
I'm scared to have to stop our Russian.
6 seconds. And then finally, the bottom is practices. What are the things, and maybe to differentiate a little bit from, like, what are the things that get you through your day or your life that are essential to your right? What's in your daily routine that ensures that you stay right? What rituals do you want to cultivate or need to cultivate? This can be aspirational. What are the practices in the bottom third? How do you do self-care? What routines keep you grounded? I always have to put exercise on mine. I probably need to put Netflix on mine. Carolina Hurricanes hockey, reading good books, watching inspiring stuff. Dog kisses? Oh, that's a great one. Yeah, that picture of Finn. Oh my gosh, like, can I pet your dog? That kid, he loves animals. Like, he doesn't get it from me. I don't hate animals, but man. Okay, so time is up. But on the next slide, we have what sort of aspirationally we're trying to get through with the creative hustle. We all have gifts that we bring to every table. Everybody does. And we all have goals that we want to accomplish. Everybody does. What are the principles, people, and practices that we can pay attention to in our lives that you've just written in this column right here, so that you could draw a line from one gift through a principle, practice, and person to a goal? And maybe it's just 2 of the middle that helps you get to a goal. I have a goal for our Thriving Congregations initiative that I want them to experience. I want them to understand how other people do hospitality very intentionally. So that's a goal. Who can we learn from, and how do we need to learn? Or I know a kid named, I call him a kid because choose your own name, Thomas Smith. Thomas Smith works for an architecture firm. And it just so happens that Thomas Smith is both a lifelong Texas Rangers fan and was the lead architect on building the brand new Texas Rangers Stadium. Tom Boyd, we call him, right? Played offensive line in high school with my brother. I want the gift I have is a gift of insight for this thriving congregations initiative. I want them to have cool experiences that help change the game and the way they think about the churches. I know Thomas. And so the goal is what if we walked with Thomas through this stadium and they talked about hospitality and where they put the bathrooms and the coffee pots and how they want you when you walk through this 1,000-foot-long arcade that runs across the back of the outfield. And they wanted you to lift your eyes up and see how big it was and see how you were tied to the history of baseball through this museum of sorts. Thomas is that is a path for me to help me see a goal. Churches want to minister to their neighbors better. They know the mayor and the police chief and the fire chief, and they know the director of social services, and they know the people that run the food pantry. And we'll have a little bit of extra money. So we all care, and we know who connects to these folks. And we all go to the grocery store every week. So how can we take this desire to have nobody hungry in our community and get closer to the goal? That's an easy one. It's like kind of a no-brainer rather than trying to devices on the floor. I think that in the big picture around practices, what we need to move to from this conveyor belt model of church is identifying the resources we have, the relationships we have, the principles that matter to us to help us get to the dreams that we have from the gifts that we have. And if Thriving Congregations does one thing on one sheet of, like if Thriving Congregations does everything on one sheet of paper, this is what it is that we're doing. We're giving people relationships and principles and practices to reach the goal of being healthy and well. These slides, I sent them to Meg, yes, Meg, I'm sorry, as a PowerPoint, but they also exist as Google Slides, and I'd be more than happy to share that with you. Because the way I constructed the slides is I put all my notes down in the bottom, and I put a lot of links down at the bottom. There's a 45-minute long video from the design school at Stanford that you can watch, and they lead you through this like a little better than I do. And there's a book coming out called Creative Hustle, where they're going to talk about how they do this in like 200 pages, not just one sheet. And there's my bibliography is in that as well, with interesting things you can see and do and read. So I'd love to share that with you. If you will, I think just give me your email address, or let's do this. If you will, I will not sell you, nor will I put you on CDF's mailing list. Because that would take more work than I really want to spend on that. But if you want to leave me your email address in a way that I can read it, I'll send you a link to my presentations from my personal Gmail, chrisaho@gmail.com. And we can go through that. We didn't talk about Acts in the early church and how the early church was innovative. We missed a lot of stuff, but I hope this was helpful for you. Sean's telling me we got to stop now.
I'm just driving my stuff, so I'm ready for work.
That's good. Any follow-up questions, feedback, notes for the good of the cause? Last thing I'll say is I don't want to be beat up, but if you have some constructive feedback to help me with this, I'd appreciate that. So my email is, you'll have my Gmail if I send it to you. You can write me there, or I'm on the CBF website. If you see a way that I can be better, it will be better for everybody, and I will take that in love your red ink, your spiritual red ink on my presentation will help me do better. So. I'm sorry I talked as much as I did. Thank y'all for being so attentive. Yeah. Oh, thank you guys. Appreciate it. Thanks to Meg for running slides and reading my mind.
And thanks to Patricia for bringing us online.
Awesome, Patricia. Thanks for being here. Hi, Patricia. Thank you. You guys see the side of my face.